McGraw-Hill, Living with Art, 13th edition, Part 3, Chapter 10, Graphic Design. Chapter Outline, Signs and Symbols, Typography and Layout, Word and Image, Data, Visualization and Interactivity, Graphic Design, and Art. Signs and Symbols. Symbols represent ideas through a widely understood system of meaning. Symbols represent ideas through a widely understood system of meaning. On the most basic level, we communicate through symbols. The sound of the symbol dog, for example, has no direct relation to the animal it stands for. In Spanish, after all, the syllables Piero indicate the same animal. Each word is part of a larger symbolic system, a language. Visual communication is also symbolic. Letters are symbols that represent sounds. The lines that we use to draw representational images are symbols for what they depict. Symbols convey information or embody ideas. Some are so common that we find it difficult to believe that they didn't always exist. Who, for example, first used arrows to indicate directions? We follow them instinctively now, but at some point they were new and had to be explained. We all recognize the symbol for children playing, and it's one of the universal signs that communicate essential information across language barriers. The silhouette of two children on a teeter-totter appears against a yellow background. We interpret the round heads and simplified bodies to represent children. Our driver's education in the United States teaches that traffic signs with yellow background tells us to proceed with caution, and diamond-shaped signs signify possible hazardous conditions. Yet even these common and relatively simple symbols were the work of graphic designers who brainstormed, researched, drew, and created prototypes to test their designs. Symbols represent ideas through a widely understood system of meaning. While some signs refer to simple concepts, other symbols embody more complex ideas and associations. The familiar rainbow flag was created in 1978 to represent the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and questioning community. It was made by designer Gilbert Baker, whom the activist Harvey Milk hired to make a flag for San Francisco's Gay Freedom Day parade. As a designer, Baker thought about what flags are, how they're seen, and what they're supposed to accomplish. Most importantly, he considered how to represent the LGBTQ+ community in a positive and uplifting way. At the time, the only symbol was a pink triangle used by the Nazis to identify homosexuals. Baker turned to nature and to the sky. He used the rainbow as his symbol, and the design was universally understood to represent inclusion and acceptance, even without any text or images. Signs and symbols. Logos are symbols that represent institutions and corporate entities. Logos are symbols that represent institutions and corporate entities. Among the most pervasive symbols in our visual environment today are logos, which are symbols of an organization or a product. The United Parcel Service, better known as UPS, logo is one of many designs by Paul Rand, one of the most influential American graphic designers. Simple, clear, distinctive, and memorable, each of these corporate logos has become familiar to millions of people around the world, instantly calling to mind the company and its products or services. As with any symbol, a logo means nothing in itself. It is up to an organization to make its logo familiar and to persuade people through sound business practices to associate it with such virtues as service, quality, and dependability. Rand's UPS logo has formed the basis of later revisions that emphasize continuity with small adjustments. Today's version, for example, looks more three-dimensional and also removed the string-tied package, which no longer conveys the range of services that the company provides. A logo like this often serves as a fundamental element of a brand identity program, a larger design undertaking that unifies an organization's overall visual presence. The guidelines for typography, color palette, layout, and imagery are developed for use in letterhead, business cards, packaging, marketing materials, websites, digital apps, office design, and more, to project a consistent image that reflects how the organization wants to be perceived. This branding has been so effective in the case of UPS that we all recognize its brown trucks and uniforms along with the logo. The color is a registered trademark, making it illegal for any delivery company except UPS to use it. Logos are symbols that represent institutions and corporate entities. Among the most pervasive symbols in our visual environment today are logos, which are symbols of an organization or a product. The United Parcel Service, better known as UPS logo, is one of many designs by Paul Rand, one of the most influential American graphic designer. He uses simple, clear, distinctive, and memorable logos to communicate to people around the world, instantly calling to mind the company's products or services. As with any symbol, a logo means nothing in and of itself. It is up to an organization to make its logo familiar and to persuade people through sound business practices to associate it with such virtues as service, quality, and dependability. Rand's UPS logo has formed the basis of later revisions that emphasize continuity with small adjustments. Today's version, for example, looks more three-dimensional and has removed the string-tied package, which no longer conveys the range of services that the company provides. Signs and symbols. Logos, typography, colors, and layout are part of brand identity. Logos, typography, colors, and layout are part of brand identity. A logo like this often serves as a fundamental element of a brand's identity program, a larger design undertaking that unifies the organization's overall visual presence. Guidelines for typography, color palette, layout, and imagery are developed for use in letterhead, business cards, packaging, marketing material, websites, digital apps, office design, and more to project a consistent image that reflects how the organization wants to be perceived. This branding has been so effective in the case of UPS that we all recognize its brown trucks and uniforms. Along with the logo, the color is a registered trademark, making it illegal for any delivery company except UPS to use it. Logos, typography, colors, and layout are part of brand identity. The color of the Guggenheim Museum's white building in New York City is part of its brand identity, but its distinctive shape plays a larger role. Architect Frank Lloyd Wright designed the Guggenheim as a continuous spiraling path for art viewers starting at the ground floor and rising 6 stories. When the museum opened in 1959, some critics derided Wright's design. Others considered its stacking rings to be the height of modern architecture. The building's unique design soon became part of the museum's visual identity. A poster designed by Malcolm Gearer in 1969 capitalizes on this association, abstracting the building into 4 large white curves against an orange background. These shapes symbolize the building and its collection, and it overshadows the museum's name below. While Guggenheim brand identity has changed over the years, Wright's building design still appears regularly in the museum's merchandise. Typography and layout. Typography is concerned with the shape and placement of letters for visual effects and clear communication. Typography is concerned with the shape and the placement of letters for visual effects and clear communication. Cultures throughout history have appreciated the visual aspects of their written language. In China and Japan and Islamic cultures, calligraphy is considered an art. Although personal writing in the West has never been granted that status, letters for public architectural inscriptions have been carefully designed since the time of the ancient Romans, whose alphabet we have inherited. With the invention of movable type around 1450, the art not just of designing, but also of organizing and printing from typed letters became an important element in producing text. Someone had to decide on the exact form of each letter, creating a visually unified alphabet that could be mass-produced as a typeface or as a style of type. Albrecht Dürer contributed to the design of well-balanced letter forms. Constructing each letter within a square, Dürer paid special attention to the balance of thick and thin lines and to the visual weight of the serifs, the short cross lines that finish the principal strokes at the base of the A, for example. Typography is concerned with the shape and the placement of letters for visual effects and clear communication. Today, typography is mostly digital. As type is created, set, and printed using computers, graphic designers select from literally thousands of typefaces and fonts. They can also create their own letters, and type design continues to be an important and highly specialized field. Designer Dana Taniyuchi creates custom-designed lettering to reflect the spirit and message of each client's brand identity. In Thank You, created for the United States Postal Service, Taniyuchi considered the function of the stamp attached to an envelope to accompany an expression of gratitude. Her unique script letters swell slightly in the middle and taper at the end. The lines meander in looping paths and transform into flowering stems and leaves. Like a bouquet of flowers, the letters echo the fondness associated with the writing of a thank you letter, putting the stamp's users at the center of the design. Typography and layout. Designers use layout to make their typography legible. Designers use layout to make their typography legible. Like typeface, a designer's concern is also layout, or how the text and images, if there are images, appear on the page together. Layout is significant because one of the most important tasks of graphic design is to devise visual presentations that make potentially confusing information easier to grasp. It usually includes specifications such as the design of the page, the width of the margins, the sizes and styles of type for text and headings. In this example by Johannes Gutenberg, which this man is credited with the invention of movable type and the printing process, Gutenberg has adapted the wine press here to serve as a printing press and invented all of the small metal letters that could combine to make words. In his Biblia Latina, also known as the Gutenberg Bible, this was the first major book to be printed using this new process, a technological breakthrough that soon replaced the slow method of making books by hand. The Bible's layout is based on earlier manuscript books, but it is challenging for the modern reader. The text appears in 40 to 42 lined rows, organized in 2 columns on each page. The borders are wide, but the style of the type that Gutenberg had to work with, known as Gothic, is difficult to read. Breaks in the paragraph are marked by colored letters, which were hand-drawn, but otherwise the text runs together in dense blocks. Since Gutenberg's day, designers have learned a great deal about creating layouts which assist readers. Word and image. Designers combine text and image to communicate their messages. Designers combine text and image to communicate their messages. Among the services offered by printers in the 15th century was the design and printing of single sheets called broadsides. Handed out around town and posted in public spaces, broadsides argued political or religious causes, told of recent events, advertised for upcoming festivals and fairs, or circulated woodcut portraits of civic and religious leaders. They were the direct ancestors not only of advertising and posters, but also of leaflets, brochures, newspapers, and magazines. With the development of color lithography in the 19th century, posters came into their own as the most eye-catching form of advertising, for color printing was not yet practical in magazines or newspapers, and television was still 100 years away. Among the most famous of all 19th century posters are those created by Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec for cabarets and dance halls of Paris. In this poster for a famous dance hall called the Moulin Rouge, the star performer Le Goulet is shown dancing in a can-can, while in the foreground rises the wispy silhouette of another star attraction, Vellatine, known as the Boneless One. The flattened, simplified forms and the dramatically cropped composition show the influence of the Japanese prints that were popular in Europe at the time. Designers combine text and image to communicate their message. Gestalt principles are also at work in the famous 1942 poster We Can Do It by J. Howard Miller. The poster, commonly known as the Rosie the Riveter, pictures one of the many women who joined the workforce during World War II. The woman is a factory employee wearing work clothes and a bandana over her hair. Her flexed arm embodies the muscle women and men put to work to support the war effort. The poster's inspirational slogan and the woman's arm are the focal points. Her head and arm form a line base on the golden section and continuously draw our eye back to the text and its uplifting message. Given in a sans serif typeface, the figure and the text stand out from the background thanks to the use of standard complementary colors. Repeated curving shapes and lines tie the work together to create an effective and powerful message. Designers combine text and image to communicate their messages. Toulouse-Lautrec drew his image on a lithographic stone, and Miller worked on paper. Today, most graphic design is done on a computer, generating digital files sent to an industrial printer. The graphic designer and the street artist Shepard Fairey uses several different materials and tools to make his works like Ideal Power. He both draws elements freehand and uses photocopies of found images. He then scans these into the computer and manipulates the color and composition, such as adding type like the simulated newspaper text that appears in the background here. This process produced what Farley refers to as a digital sketch, which he then turned into stencils for screen printing in layers, holding the bold and graphic quality that his work is known for. Word and image. Designers rely on Gestalt principles and the golden section. Designers rely on Gestalt principles and the golden section. In this image, created by Toulouse-Lautrec, you can see that text and image are integrated through color, line, and Gestalt principles. The red letters echo the red stockings and the red polka dot blouse. The black letters mirror the silhouette background figures. The artist outlined the words Moulin Rouge in the same manner that he would outline the dancers in the yellow clouds of smoke. The letters are also Cher Valentina's tallness or curves of the dancers' bodies. The whole experience of this design is more than the sum of its individual elements. Toulouse-Lautrec's posters were so effective that they were immediately recognized as collector's items, and instructions circulated secretly for attaching them from kiosks on which they were painted. Data visualization and interactivity. Designers use data visualization to communicate complex numerical data in visual form. Designers use data visualization to communicate complex numerical data into visual form. In 1812, Napoleon Bonaparte marched the French armies east on a foolhardy invasion to expand his empire. He entered Russian territory with 422,000 soldiers. By the time Napoleon turned back at the gates of Moscow, only 100,000 French soldiers were still alive. When the army finally made it out of Russia, just 10,000 survived. Menard's 1869 diagram makes visible the campaign's human toll. The thick brown line plots the movement of Napoleon's troops and the size of his army, beginning at the left. Two thin lines mark regiments sent off to fight the main route. The brown line moves to the right. It gets smaller as soldiers died in battle and from starvation, disease, and infection. The black line traces the Army's return west, the number of soldiers rapidly declining despite reuniting with the remnants of the other regimes. At the bottom of the diagram, Menard plotted the freezing temperatures that added to the French soldiers' misery and loss of life. We feel the power of Menard's data visualization looking at the contrast of brown and black lines. Designers use data visualization to communicate complex numerical data into visual form. By the end of the 20th century, data visualization was set in motion using computer programs. Aaron Copland's data visualization flight patterns, created using a program language called processing, traces the flight patterns of airplanes traveling to the United States over a 24-hour period. The source of Copland's information was the Federal Aviation Administration's flight records. Copland plotted each of the 140,000 flights over the span of a day. As the planes move to and from U.S. airports, they appear as colorful lines, with each type of plane a different color. The lines of Copland's data traces the shape of the United States, but the shape is skewed to reflect the popularity of major airports in New York, Miami, Dallas, Los Angeles, and Chicago. Since the data is visualized over the course of a day, the time differences across the nation are captured, with the East Coast lighting up early and the West Coast remaining active later. Data visualization and interactivity. Digital data visualization can be interactive to show numerical data's change over time. Digital data visualization can be interactive to show numerical data's change over time. The human user is at the center of the design, especially in our digital era. Graphic designers spend a great deal of time thinking about the users as the design signs, logos, typeface, and data visualizations. They want us to successfully interpret a design's meaning and to associate it with their client. When we experience the design on a web page or app, designers factor in our experience of the interaction. Where should headings go to help with comprehension? What should the clickable links look like? How should the information be organized on the app? How can the site be made accessible? These matters of user experience are in many ways just as important to the companies and the organizations as their logo and brand identity. Data visualization and interactivity. Designers are interested in how human users experience their works. Designers are interested in how human users experience their work. A spectacular example of user experience design started with children in Washington, D.C. Climbing aboard a specially outfitted school bus, aerospace company Lockheed Martin hired the McCain World Group designers to promote its role in space exploration and to inspire students to careers in science. The designer's solution was the field trip to Mars, turning the familiar school trip into a voyage into space. They transformed the bus windows into virtual reality scenes, displaying photographs taken on Mars and mapped into DC streets. As the bus turned corners, the displaying images moved in the same direction. The sound of the wind-blown sand pelting the bus-filled air. The students were immersed in the experience, looking at over 200 square miles of stark Mars landscape. To develop this promotional project, the designers thought about how users typically experience virtual reality alone in a headset that blocks out the outside stimulus. They developed the field trip to Mars to transform that experience and to create a collective adventure, letting students interact and engage with each other during their journey around the red planet. Graphic design and art. Illustration is art that translates text into images. Illustration is art that translates text into images. Here's an example that we saw earlier in the book where we have an image of feather artist from Aztec culture. Illustration is art that translates text into images, such as this image, which was made to accompany a poem. Illustration is art that translates text into images. This does not mean that illustrations cannot be beautiful and that illustrators cannot develop a unique style. Aubrey Beardsley created the climax to accompany a pivotal scene in Solomon by Oscar Wilde. The play's title character upholds the severed head of John the Baptist, nearly kissing his dead lips. Beardsley's drawing style is distinctive, with long, elegant figures defined solely by fine contour lines with no modeling. The flat areas of black ink and the organic patterns in the upper and lower corners are typical of Beardsley's approach, widely admired by publishers who commissioned his illustrations and the readers who purchased them. Graphic design and art. Illustration may have commercial purposes, but artists can develop a unique style. Illustration may have commercial purposes, but artists can develop a unique style. Manga is a more contemporary genre of illustration that gives the image a starring role. These serial publications have their roots in early Japanese prints and narrative scroll paintings. Manga illustration uses text and image to tell a story, frequently over years or even decades. Dynamic drawing enhances the story's drama, although manga styles vary. As the photograph seen here demonstrates, some manga are drawn with thick outlines and flat washes of color in a more comic book style. Others are more naturalistic, with modeling to suggest three-dimensional figures. Scenes in each panel play out from below or on a diagonal, with little in the background to distract from the action. The figures, idealized faces, have exaggerated features and expressions, from moody furrowed brows to wide open mouths of exuberance. The characters, similarly idealized bodies, engage in theatrical poses, making exaggerated movements to act out the narrative. Text appears in speech bubbles and integrated into the action, furthering the story with theatrical dialogue and narration. Graphic design and art. Graphic design is part of stylistic movements in art. Graphic design is part of stylistic movements in art. Even graphic advertisements can span the gap between art and design. Books, Please, on Every Subject is a poster designed by Alexander Radchenko to promote a state publisher. The artist began his career as a painter, but his communist policies led him to abandon painting, which he viewed as elitist, for the designer's functional purpose. He created book jackets, advertisements, and posters to promote the principles of the Russian Revolution. He worked in a style known as constructivism, which used abstraction and geometric shapes that emphasized the formal elements of line, color, and texture. The constructivist style was used for both fine art and design, inspired by modern industry. As seen here, Radchenko also integrated photography into his work, combining its realism with shapes in rich and saturated colors. Graphic design is part of stylistic movements in art. One of the earliest artists to bring the power of graphic design to works of fine art was Andy Warhol. His famous images of Campbell's soup cans are often talked about in the context of the history of art, for they signaled the arrival of a new kind of subject matter. Some viewers have seen them as a criticism of mass production and consumer cultures. Others have seen them as a celebration of those same things. But one thing they certainly are is a portrait collection of a very successful graphic design, the Campbell Soup label. Graphic design and art. Artists have presented graphic design and its messages as their subject matter. Artists have presented graphic design and its messages as their subject matter. Whereas Warhol painted portraits of graphic design, Barbara Kruger appropriated its methods. Kruger worked for years as a graphic designer and art director for glossy magazines, where she became an expert in the ways and the words and the images that are used together to influence readers. She made use of her experience in works such as Untitled, Your Gaze Hits the Side of My Face, which combines words and images in a manner of a poster or an advertisement. The image is a found photograph of a sculpture of a woman's head. It can neither see nor speak. Passive and motionless, it exists only to be looked at. The words, in contrast, are visually more dynamic. Every other word punches out towards us, asserting itself and disrupting our reading. The woman's face is a natural focal point, and each time we are drawn back to it, we enact the statement again and again. Our gaze hits the side of her face until we become aware of our looking as a kind of aggression. This concludes Chapter 10.